Alright, hello everybody. My name is Cora McGrew, and this is my first YouTube video. Okay, about a week and a half or so ago, I got to play against a 2400 player in a tournament known as the Michigan Bottom Half Class Championships. And I was playing black against Eric Torman, who has had a UCF rating in the 2500s. Now he's in the 2400s, but obviously a very formidable player, and it was a great honor to be able to play him. Now, I will grant, before this tournament, he hadn't played a lot of tournament chess. In fact, his most recent tournament before this one happened to be about 15 years ago. So he may have been a little bit caught off guard by some of the stuff that I played in this game. But even so, it was a very interesting game. So I was black, and the game started out with pawn to d4, and I played pawn to e6. And this is kind of a favorite of mine ever since I was a beginner. And black's idea is pretty simple. So if white plays pawn to e4, I'll usually go back into a French defense, and if they play c4, like they did in the game, now my usual plan is to go into a Dutch defense with pawn to f5. So after f5, my opponent played knight to f3, I played knight to f6, and he played g3. Now, there are a lot of different ways black can play this position. When I was younger, I used to go with bishop to e7, and this happens to go into the classical Dutch after bishop g2, castles, castles, and now d6. And there are some ideas with knight to e4. I will say that against a well-prepared player playing white, I think white does get a bit of an advantage. But this is what I used to do a lot when I was younger. But in this game, I decided to go ahead and play very directly with the stone wall with pawn to d5. And as we're going to see, it's not going to be your ordinary stone wall. So after I played d5, he continues with bishop to g2, and now I play bishop to e7, he castles, and I play knight e4. So as we're going to see with all of these moves, I'm deliberately delaying castling, but there's a specific reason as to why I'm doing that, because I want to launch some kind of attack against the king. So after knight to e4, my opponent continues with b3. Now, what is the reason for the move b3, you might ask? Well, the reason for it happens to do with the fact that he wants to do one of two things. Either he wants to play bishop e2, fianchetto his bishop, or he wants to play the move bishop a3 and trade off dark squared bishops, because as we can see, this bishop on c8 is what's known as a bad bishop. It's kind of bumping into its own pawns, and an idea with bishop to a3 might be to try to trade off what is known as my good bishop, because my dark squared bishop has more scope. So after b3, I continued with the move knight to c6, and I guess he chickened out on trading dark squared bishops. If he did play bishop to a3, I will note I do have a good response with the move bishop to f6. But after bishop e2, now is the time to start with the move h5. And it's important to note that this is a system that has been patented by the great Hungarian Grandmaster Richard Rapport. In fact, you'll even hear sometimes that this is called the Rapport Stonewall Dutch. It's very unusual. This is relatively new opening theory over the past several years, but the whole idea is that black just wants to steam on ahead and crush white on the king's side. So after h5, if white plays h4, I think we all kind of know the move that's coming next. We're just going to play g5 and tear apart the king side. In the game, my opponent continued with knight c3, and here, objectively speaking, this move h4 is the most accurate way to play. And after e3, it's actually an interesting idea after h takes g3, h takes g3, and now bishop to b4, which I hadn't completely prepared before the game, but the queen is going to come over to the h-file and attack. But in the game, I played the slightly inaccurate move, pawn to g5, and after e3, I played bishop to f6. So I'm just covering the e5 square, and my opponent continued with rook c1, and now I played h4. So all of these moves are pretty natural, but due to my somewhat inaccurate opening play, there does happen to be a resource for white, which could have shut down my kingside play. So I will pause, and if you want, you can pause the video and try to figure it out. Okay, so when I was analyzing this game afterwards with an international master friend of mine, he pointed out that white has this option of the move pawn to g4. And the idea of this, it's not an easy move to spot, but the idea of this is to try to keep lines closed. Because if I continue with f takes g4, then there's an idea of knight takes c4, d takes c4, knight d2, and this pawn on e4 is kind of weak, and I don't really get the play that I want over on the king side. And if I continued instead with a move like h3, well, the bishop just backs up, and surprisingly enough, not so easy for black to make progress here, because even if I play f takes g4, again, we kind of run into the same type of issue where my pawns are just weak, and I don't really have a great way forward to attack. So yeah, that was what my opponent should have played. But instead of playing g4, which I will admit is not an easy move to spot, my opponent tried to follow the principle in chess, which is that if your opponent is attacking you on the side of the board, I should try to counterattack in the center. And that is what my opponent is going to try to do. So he takes me on d5, and after I take back, he jumps in right in the middle of the board with knight to e5. And I responded with bishop takes c5, d takes c5, and now bishop to e6. So with this move, bishop e6, I just block everything along this diagonal. And at this point, my opponent takes me on e4, and it's interesting because technically speaking, I should have captured back with the d-pawn, and there are a number of different reasons for this. For one thing, the pawns are a little bit more together, and for another thing, it doesn't quite give my opponent the opportunity to do something on the f-file like he could have in the game. But I played f takes e4, and this is a bit of a mistake, although it's not easy to spot why. But the point of f takes c4 was that I thought in the game that I just wanted to play queen d7 and castle queenside, which is not so easy to do if you capture with d takes e4, because now the d-file is open. So after f takes c4, my opponent continued with f3, h takes g3, and now he played f takes c4. So at this point, things get very sharp, because I'm trying to tear him apart on the king side, and he's trying to tear me apart in the middle of the board. So at this point, I continued with queen to d7, and around here, my opponent made the mistake of queen to f3. But this is an extremely complicated position, and it turns out that white has a very good move here, which can stop my attack completely. So if you want, feel free to pause the video and think about what you could play for white. Okay, so for those of you who thought or just want to enjoy the show, it turns out in this mad position, white has some possibilities with the move. So white can play h takes g3, and now my idea was to go ahead and castle queenside and play the move queen to h7 here. But white does have a possibility to stop my move queen to h7 with this move rook to f6, because now if I play queen h7, he will just go ahead and grab my bishop on e6. So I'll admit that was not, I think, something that either my opponent or I thought about, because the other move that I was definitely calculating a lot in the game is this very natural looking move e takes d5, forking both my bishop and my knight, and then my idea was to play queen to h7, and if white plays, let's say, rook to f2, queen h2 check, things get pretty complicated after king to f1, bishop to h3. But yeah, so as it turned out, maybe rook to f6 was a good move there. But I think after queen d7, my opponent just kind of freaked out as a result of my attack. I definitely have a lot of wild and interesting possibilities with queen to h7 and g takes h2. So he decided to continue with this move, queen to f3. Probably thinking that he was happy with an endgame, and maybe that could just dissipate some of the complications. But at this point, I decided that a pawn is a pawn, and I continued with g takes h2 check, king h1, and now I went ahead and castled queenside. So obviously I don't want to take on e4, because after queen takes e4, the lines are open, and it's a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit iffy. So I castle queenside, and now he takes me on d5. Now it's very important that you capture back the right way, because if you capture back the wrong way with bishop takes d5, what move do you think white has in this position? Okay, well done if you spotted it. Surprisingly enough, white has an idea with pawn to e6, and this attacks my queen and my rook on h8. So I have to be careful with recapturing back here, but luckily I saw pawn to e6 in the game, and played queen takes d5, and after queen takes d5, I played bishop takes d5 pretty quickly. I actually realized right after I played it that rook takes d5 might be a little bit interesting as well, because if bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, and that is going to lead to checkmate. But bishop takes d5 is fine, and now he plays e4, and I back my bishop up to e6, and so at this point we're in an endgame, and it's time to take stock of this position, because as we can see, white has the two bishops, but they also aren't very good bishops, because they're just bumping into their own pawns, and the position is kind of closed, and as we know in chess, closed positions do not favor bishops very much. And this bishop on e6 is doing a very good job of blockading those doubled e-pawns. So, after I played bishop e6, my opponent played rook d1. I think rook f6 might have been a little bit more of a robust way of trying to get some counterplay, although I will admit I do have options of defending the bishop with rook d to e8. But I think he was worried about my rook coming into d2, so I played rook d1, and now I just go ahead with the move g4. The point is to play g3 and possibly defend this pawn on h2. So after rook takes d8, king takes d8, yet again, I think rook f6 has to be played, because white has double pawns, but I think also in a weird sense, this e5 pawn might be considered a bit of a strength in white's position in trying to get some counterplay. But after bishop c1, now this just drops my e5 pawn, and I continued with knight takes e5, bishop g5 check, king e8, and now he plays bishop f6, forking my rook and knight, but I continued with rook to h5, and now after bishop takes a5, rook takes a5, finally gets rid of the h2 pawn, but it is coming at a cost for white because now this rook is going to become extremely active. So here in this position I continued with rook to c5, king g3, rook c2, and all of these pawns are going to drop off. So after a3, rook c3 check, king f4, rook takes b3, rook h1, rook takes a3. We can now see that I am 3 pawns up against a master. But the show's not over because we can see that this king is still a pretty active piece. So after king to g5, rook to a2, he tries king to f6, and now I have to be very careful because don't want to do anything stupid. So I continue with this move bishop to g8, stopping the rook from coming into h7 and keeping an eye on this bishop on g2. And here he plays bishop to f1. If he had played rook to h8 and I played king to f8, now he plays bishop to f1. What do you think black can play in this position? Alright, well done if you spotted it. Rook f2 check. And that forks the king and the bishop. But in the game, played bishop to f1, and it played king to f8, pawn to e5, rook f2 check, king to g5, and I'm just trying to keep control of the position and prevent any kind of counterplay. And here I played bishop e6, bishop d3, a5, and now my extra pawns are starting to roll. So he plays rook to h7, g3, bishop e4, g2, and he's forced to give up the bishop. And now he goes back to f6, and we gotta be careful because if we move this bishop off of this diagonal, then there's rook to h8. Actually, although I have to admit, I guess it's not me because I have rook g8. But anyway, so I go back to g8, just trying to stop any potential weirdness there. Now he takes pawn on c7, I check on f2, king to g5, bishop d5, and after rook c5, here I could have kept the bishop with bishop c6, and after rook takes a5, I have an extra pawn, so we're not in just a rook and bishop versus king and rook scenario, which is technically a draw. So I should be able to win this and grab the e-pawn. But in the game, I decided to sacrifice bishop because I was confident my pawns could win. And after rook takes d5, a3, rook d8 check, king e7, rook to b8. Now I continue with rook to b2, king to f5, a2, and I started pushing and tries to get some counterplay with his pawn on e6, but now after rook a8 check, I very deliberately did not play king to c7 because if pawn to e7, rook e2, it turns out that this position is actually a draw because my king is not quite in the active position it should be to support this pawn on b4. But instead of king to c7, I continued with king to e7, and now my king has a clear line coming up and supporting the pawn. So he plays rook to a7, king to e6, e7, and now rook to e2 is played. Rook takes a2, rook takes e7, and around this point, this is just going to go into the famous Lucena position. So my king is going to come up the board to b1, and he plays king to e3. So some of you who are watching might not know the Lucena, so at this point, feel free to pause your video and ask yourself what you would play for black here. Alright, for those of you who guessed or already knew, the winning move of the Lucena position is move rook d5. And the idea of this is that black is going to build a bridge when the king comes out to escape the checks. And then when the king finally reaches b4, this rook is going to help shield the king from the checks. So, for example, if white played rook to h8, king c2, rook c8 check, king b3, rook b8, king c3, king to b4, and then rook to b5. And by that point, the pawn is just going to promote to a queen. Alright, well, instead of that, he tried to attack my rook, but at this point, the rook is just going to go behind the pawn on b5, and plays king d3, but it doesn't really matter because I play king c1, and the problem for white is even if he plays rook c8 check, king d1 can occur, and now this pawn is going to promote with check, so he doesn't have any time to threaten mate on h1, because I will just queen with check. Okay, so as a result of that, he resigned. And yeah, so this is one of the 2,400 players I've defeated in tournament chess. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any thoughts, feel free to comment down below.